Welcome to the podcast, Broadcast from the Past, where we imagine what broadcast news would be like before radio or TV. We are your hosts, Tony and Zach.
So let's orient you on the structure of this podcast. Each episode begins with a brief introduction where we explain the concept of the podcast and identify the time period we are broadcasting from. Then we go right into the broadcast in character with guest voice actors. After that, we check in with reality with Keeping It Real, where we explain what facts were real, what facts were played with, and which were totally made up for the broadcast. We will end each episode chatting about the research process, what we already knew, what we discovered while researching, and what we didn't get to include. We will give reading recommendations and talk about where we got our information, and then finish off with a round of acknowledgements to all the contributors.
Each episode is written by a passionate history buff who gets to choose which awesome moments of history we get to focus on.
Today is Tony's turn.
Today's episode is set in London, England, first in 1647 and then in a flash forward to 1649. The episode is structured in the form of a presidential debate and takes place first in Hampton Palace and then in Westminster. Join us live from the debate between King Charles and Cromwell to see who should be the next leader of Britain, moderated by that leveler, Elizabeth Lilburne, who promises to stay unbiased. This is it, Execution 1649. And now, on to the play.
Tonight, the high-stakes showdown here at Hampton Court Palace between King Charles and Oliver Cromwell, the MP for Cambridge. Their first face-to-face meeting in this debate. Their first face-to-face meeting ever. A historic race for the king and leader of the country upended just weeks ago with the seizure of the king by the New Model Army and his imprisonment. Now he is facing his opponent from an entirely new setting, his prison in the palace. I am Elizabeth Lilburne, wife of John, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a populist and stand here representing the people. Let's set up the rules for the debate. 1 question, 1 minute each candidate. No interruptions. No notes, no prepared remarks. Neither candidate has seen the question. And the question, direct from the people, is monarchy. Yea or nay? And over to you, Your Majesty, to reply.
I would know by what power I am called hither. I would know by what authority. I mean lawful. There are many unlawful authorities in the world, thieves and robbers by the highways. Remember, I am your king, your lawful king, and what sins you bring upon your heads, and the judgment of God upon this land. And you, Madam Lilburne, who threatened to take a head for head if your husband was not released for imprisonment, are not an unbiased arbiter.
Is that your answer, sir? To the question of monarchy, yea or nay?
Clearly, it is a yea, and here are my reasons. First, it is divinely ordained.
Sir? Your second reason?
Really, the first reason is sufficient, but here are a few more. The English and Scottish peoples are like children and need to be guided. I am a divine shepherd for them, and they are my sheep.
Sheep or children? Your metaphors are confused, Your Majesty.
No interruptions, Mr. Cromwell, please.
Do not speak so. I think it is my duty to God first and to my country, both as an honest man and a good king and a good Christian. I will say I am the king for both the Scottish and the English people. I represent all of you, whether you are for me or against me, my little children. I'm going to make sure that you're represented when I make intercessions with the saints and our Lord God. I'm going to give you hope, decency, honor, respect, treating my little people with dignity, making sure you get on the path to heaven. Thus I say monarchy is best for the good of the kingdom and your own salvations.
And yet my husband still remains unjustly imprisoned.
Why, you...
Your time's up, sir. And now, to Member of Parliament for Cambridge and Commander of the New Model Army, Lieutenant General Cromwell.
Authorities and powers are the ordinance of God. This or that species is of human institution and limited, some with larger, others with stricter bands, each one according to its constitution. But I do not therefore think the authorities may do anything, and yet such obedience be due. All agree that there are cases in which it is lawful to resist. If so, your ground fails, and so likewise the inference. The king, God bless him, has betrayed our trust, and therefore we must say nay.
The conclusion here is that both of our participants are a company of unjust and unrighteous judges that more sought themselves and their own ends than the public good of the kingdom, or any of those that faithfully adventured their lives, therefore.
Hey!
Thank you, gentlemen. The time's up, and good night.
When the treason is so slow, and the crowd wants a great show, do not use a slow, dull blade. Sharpen it with those who know. Call 1-800-BLADE Sharpeners at Chop Chop 22. Side effects may include sudden loss of height. Please check the validity of the warrant before chopping.
We come to you now live from Westminster via messenger pigeon, where the second and last debate between Lieutenant General Oliver Cromwell and Charles Stuart, the former King Charles, will take place under strict safety protocols, given the unrest around the country in this year of our Lord, 1649. The audience here has promised to remain silent. There will be no cheers, boos, or other heckling, except right now, as we welcome to the stage Oliver Cromwell and former King Charles Stuart.
Justice!
And I do want to say a very good evening to you both. This debate will cover two major topics. At the beginning of each section, each candidate will have 2 minutes, uninterrupted, to answer my first question. The debate commission will then turn on their microphone only when it is their turn to answer, and the commission will turn it off exactly when the 2 minutes have expired. After that, both microphones will remain on. But on behalf of the people, let us not have a repeat of last time. I'm going to ask you to please speak one at a time. The goal is for you to hear each other and for the English people to hear every word of what you both have to say. And so with that, if you're ready, let's start.
With my divine right to be heard.
And you will be, sir. And we will begin with the fight against the bubonic plague. Mr. Stuart, the first question is for you. England and Scotland share the same monarch. You, sir. And yet Scotland is heading into a dangerous new phase. Since the two of you last shared a stage, more than 2,000 Scots have died from the plague. So please be specific. How would you lead the country during this next stage of the reoccurring plague? 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
I care very much for my people, my poor, uneducated people in England and Scotland. I pray always to God and the patron saints of the plague, St. Roch, and even the newest, St. Rosalia.
Your wife is Catholic, is she not?
What does this have to do with it? She prays to the same God as ours to stop the damn plague.
Now there are some rumors that you failed to send aid to the Scots because the Presbyterian Scots resist your attempts to impose the Book of Common Prayer on them.
Do I get my 2 minutes uninterrupted, or will you continue to interrupt me?
Proceed.
I would lead the country by continuing to pray for them and to support the bishops in interceding with the saints on behalf of all my people. In addition, in order to ensure that all my peoples are as one under my authority, I will continue to bring together the Church of Scotland and the Church of England to ensure coherence. Finally, I will end the abuse of honours and the financial dependence of the Crown, restoring the authority of the Crown and the prestige of the nobility. All of these together will ensure that God recognizes we have returned to the right path. Punishments such as the plague will cease, and the people will be saved.
And now, General Cromwell, to you. How would you lead the country out of this crisis? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
The sins of the people are the cause of all these misfortunes. The divine hand of providence is directing all of these events: disease, economic collapse, war, and strife. The people are full of sin and vice, and this traitor and public enemy, Charles Stuart, is the prime mover of this sin. I would bring this murderer in a court of law, in a special trial, strip away all the powers of the nobility, establish a written constitution to act as my instrument of government, wage war on the heretic Scots and Irish, damn their eyes, and give some more freedoms to the Protestants. Those poor people are the most persecuted, after Puritans, of course. And we need to get rid of Catholics. They are the parasites on the souls of good Christians. And I would ban Christmas.
Thank you to both of you. I see we have covered both what you would do and what you think the causes of the current malaise are. I also note that neither of you have addressed the plague as a specific issue to be resolved, but as a part of a package of problems. Let us turn now to the second of the two topics, religion. I have here in my hand a question from Margaret Lucas, poet, philosopher, and general pro-royalist. The question to you, General Cromwell, from Lucas is, why do you meddle with divine mysteries? And what are your plans for the practice of the Anglican religion?
I want to be very clear. I want to embrace the liberty of conscience, to a point, of course, but the liberty of conscience for people like me, of course. The rest of you need to give up your baubles, your velvets, your mysteries, and incense and mutterings and rituals. Your Anglicanism is almost Catholic. My successes on the battlefield prove that God is on my side and agrees with my interpretation. In fact, not an interpretation at all, the truth. You will learn to live with it.
Number one, he says that we're learning to live with it. The devastation of our religion and the devastation of the war. People are learning to die with it. You folks, you common folks at home will have an empty chair at the kitchen table this morning. That wife, her husband is now gone. Learning to live with it? Ha! They're dying with it because Cromwell has never said what the real danger is. You tell the people their religion is dangerous now. What should they do about the danger? And you, Cromwell, take no responsibility. We are in this situation now because we have strayed too far from the divine messages and the Book of Common Prayers. Is there a need for reform? Yes. But Cromwell is taking us in the wrong direction.
He must be removed. It is dangerous, burdensome, and necessary for the safety of the English people.
For the people? For the people? I truly desire nothing more than their liberty and freedom, as much as anybody whomsoever. But I must tell you that their liberty and freedom consists in having of government, those laws by which their life and their gods may be most their own. It is not for having to share in government, sir. That is nothing pertaining to them. A subject and a sovereign are clean different things, and therefore, until they do that, I mean that you do put the people in that liberty, as I say, certainly they will never enjoy themselves.
I am the best leader.
Then are we to call you King, Cromwell? Is it the crown you seek?
It may be a legal necessity. Can the country truly be led without a king, without this legal function? But no, I cannot undertake the government with the title of king. And that is mine answer to this great and weighty business. I say again, however, this tyrant, this murderer, Charles Stuart, must be removed. Too many good Englishmen have died.
All the world knows that I never did begin a war with the two houses of Parliament. You started it.
Sit down, sir. And to you, Cromwell, I say the same. That is all the time we have for tonight. Join us next time for the King's trial and execution. Long live the Levellers!
Keeping it real. In this part of the podcast, we review the segment script and tease out what really happened, what we made up, and what was somewhere in the middle. So, Tony, tell us, what did you keep real and what did you fudge a bit?
Okay, well, I did a lot of creative writing, actually, and fudged a few things. I think the first thing that I really fudged was, of course, I put it in the form of a presidential debate, which didn't and wouldn't have happened. But I guess the first thing that was true is that all these people really existed. Elizabeth Lilburne really existed. Charles Stuart really existed. Oliver Cromwell actually existed. So Elizabeth Lilburne was a leveler and actually the wife of a man named John Lilburne. He also existed. And the Levelers were a political movement active during the English Civil War. They were absolutely committed to popular sovereignty, extended suffrage, religious tolerance, equality before the law. You could call them an early populist movement. They were definitely in line with populism, and that you can see that basically because they talk about a lot about equal natural rights, and they really reached the public through pamphlets, petitions, speeches, etc. Lilburne, John Lilburne was basically a political activist, mixed with a journalist of a sort, but undercutting all of that, he was a religious radical. Also, Elizabeth Lilburne was famous in her own right. She married a man, John, who had already been imprisoned once for his political beliefs, and she often spoke up to get him out of prison. And here I want to play a little clip of me and the actress playing Elizabeth Lilburne discussing the character.
Also, by the way, you guys should research her. She's fucking amazing. She is so interesting. Do you know she walked all the way from Oxford to somewhere else while 8 months pregnant?
8 months pregnant. Yeah,
yes,
I read
to knock to be like, let my husband out of prison, you fuckers.
I mean, to be fair, her husband seemed like kind of an ass, so I feel bad for her.
I mean, they seemed a perfect match, actually. They were both very radical, so I'm fine with it.
I felt like she kept trying so hard to get him out of prison, and he just ended up getting back in prison. This poor woman.
Okay, so that was a little bit about Elizabeth Lilburne. In addition, Charles, of course, was a real person. He reigned from 1625 to 1649. He was actually the second son of James I, and he was never expected to be king. He only became heir to the throne after the death of his older brother, Henry, in 1612. And like his father, Charles deeply believed in the divine right of kings and never, ever wavered from that doctrine, even when it was clear that it would cause his own death. In personality and character, he was obstinate, particularly in his political life, and constantly quarreled with his parliaments, ruling even without one for 11 years. He was, however, not a stupid man. He was very well educated, and he had a deep appreciation and affection for art. However, he did not brook any disagreement or questioning of his decisions or his motives. In the play, we refer to his wife, Henrietta Maria, and indeed, she was a Catholic princess. She was French, and she was actually born in the Louvre, which I think is an interesting tidbit. She was actually the daughter of Henri IV, Henry IV of France, who was assassinated when she was less than a year old. She had a tough time when she first married Charles because she was only 16 and she grew to be fond of her husband, but there was a big power struggle actually for influence over her husband between herself and her husband's favorite, George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham. After Buckingham was assassinated, Henrietta and Charles actually became much closer at that point, and then after that fell in love with each other. Something I didn't know, and I was trying to research and got very contradictory information, was actually what Charles Stuart would have sounded like when he spoke. Me and some of the actors did some research on this, trying to figure out what accent to go with. It seemed to be that he would have spoken English with a slight Scots accent. I think that's absolutely delightful, but in fact, there was a lot of contradictory information, so in the end, the actor just went with his own accent. A lot of the lines that I gave to Stuart in this little mini play were actually taken from two sources that actually wrote down his real words, and they were his speech that he gave at his trial, and then, of course, the speech he gave at the scaffold before he was executed. Both are very well documented, so it was kind of easy to lift and take that into the spirit of, and sometimes very directly into the play. I also refer obliquely to Margaret Lucas, later Margaret Cavendish, the Duchess of Newcastle upon Tyne, who was an English natural philosopher, poet, fiction writer, playwright. She was a remarkable woman in her own right, and actually is considered in some circles to be the originator of science fiction. This is very debatable. Mary Shelley is supposed to be the originator, but Margaret Lucas actually wrote the book The Blazing World, and that is a story about a woman who is, kidnapped and goes on all of these adventures and ends up finding a portal into a parallel world. And in that world, there are these creatures who say, "Oh, you're a goddess," and they, make her into their queen. It is very, very interesting if you're interested in the history of science fiction. But yes, it is one example. So I did want to kind of bring her into the play. But I have to say that in general, there were a lot of men and women both who were very fascinating in this period of English history. So the English Civil War is actually littered with very interesting people and figures, but also importantly, these people and their lives are very well documented. And then, of course, there's Cromwell, who at the time, I think 1647, 1649, he would be about 50 years old. And perhaps he would have a West Country accent, not quite sure. We went with the actor's natural accent again. But I think interestingly about Cromwell is that he didn't go from opposition leader to someone who wanted to execute the king right away. There was a great deal of time where he thought that the king had to be rehabilitated, the parliament had to come out on top and everything, but he was still hopeful that the king would come on side, basically. And I think the time gap in the play between 1647 and 1649 is really important, because in 1647 Cromwell still thought there was hope, but by 1649 he was no longer talking to the king. He'd already gone back to the war, and he thought there was nothing left to do but actually remove the king forcibly. And of course, all of this at the time when there is this massive reformation going on, where the king is really trying to push the Book of Common Prayers on a very, very conservative Protestant Scottish church. In reality, in 1647, I think during the summer, Cromwell would frequently actually visit Charles at the Hampton Court Palace. He was trying to really convince the king on a peace treaty called the Heads of Proposals. It was remarkably lenient compared to what Parliament actually wanted. It restored the king's authority, it protected the king's family, and most importantly, it offered religious tolerance for everyone, except, of course, for the Catholics, which meant the bishops could stay. It was a major sticking point for this highly, highly religious king. And, of course, there was, surprisingly, a mutual respect between the two of them at this point. Cromwell was genuinely impressed by Charles' manners, and especially his devotion to his family. What happens then is 1648, Cromwell is fighting and winning the Second Civil War, which basically is Charles' fault that it kind of came out again. So he sparked it from his captivity. And to Cromwell, this second outbreak of violence was an unforgivable sin, proof that God had judged against the king and that Charles was personally responsible for renewing the bloodshed. And I tried to refer to that in the second half of the play. And of course, by January 1649, the king is on trial. Cromwell does not speak to Charles anymore, but he was one of the judges in the courtroom. From the benches, Cromwell watched as Charles refused to recognize the authority of the court, arguing that a king could not be tried by an earthly power. At this point, Cromwell is doing everything he can to make sure all the politicians sign off on the king's death warrant. And then, of course, Charles is executed. Now, there is a legend that after Charles's execution, there was one last meeting between the two. According to the memoir of the Earl of Southampton, on the night after Charles was beheaded, a man wrapped in a dark cloth secretly visited the palace where the king's body lay in its coffin. The visitor looked down at the severed head, sighed deeply, and muttered the words, "Cruel necessity." And of course, there was a lot of rumors at the time that Cromwell wanted to be the next king and that this was all just an excuse. But in the end, he actually became Lord Protector instead. Now, this was a title which was used during the Commonwealth or the interregnum following the Civil War, but actually had existed before that. In the early 15th century, Henry VI actually had two Lords Protector. They were John of Lancaster and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, and that was surely not the only time. So I did want to allude to this idea that becoming the king was not on Cromwell's agenda. Now, Charles, of course, had a son, also named Charles, who was briefly declared King of England upon the execution of his father, and did take Cromwell to battle in order to try to preserve it, but lost. He went into exile, and then afterwards, Cromwell was in power until his death in, I think it was 1658. So for 9 years after the death of Charles I. After Cromwell died in 1658, his son Richard took over for a while, but was particularly ineffective, and therefore, kind of fomented a political crisis. And after the restoration of the monarchy happened in 1660, and Charles II came to the throne officially again. Cromwell's legacy is pretty rough. He's blamed for quite a lot of things, and the Irish, of course, famously hate him with due cause. And he has a very complicated legacy. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to bring up the whole Constitution bit. And
I think the first written Constitution, great. Certainly, but then his whole attitude towards the Irish, of course, it's very brutal. His also, he banned Christmas. You realize that, right?
Yeah, he's a Protestant, he's got his prerogatives.
Protestants also follow Christmas. No, this is him and his ultra zealot.
Well, they're in the transition phase, They're kind of like, okay, we're not going to have. You know what's super interesting though? The Weckman, like the little guy that they give from Saint Nicholas in Germany. Have you ever seen them?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's super weird little pastry, has a pipe for whatever reason. It turns out the Weckman is actually a vestige of the Protestant Reformation, because basically Saint Nicholas was this very popular Catholic saint. He was the patron saint of sailors, other ship, besides what we know for now, like giving presents to kids. And so basically they're banning all the icons, and then all the kids were like, "Yo, Saint Nicholas, that's our guy. Like you can't take him away from." Like, all right, well, we can't have icons in the church. Like we kind of killed a lot of people over this issue. We can't go back on that. But I'll tell you what, we'll bake you a little icon. We'll bake you a little Saint Nicholas dude, and then you guys can have that and eat it, and we're good, right? And the kids were like, "Yeah, that works. That's something,
You
So
don't want the children to be against you, right? The children will take the world
Yeah,
down.
it's just also there were some saints days that they're just all right, the kids really like St. Nicholas Day, and the Pope is an evil bastard, and Catholicism is going to send us all to hell. But I think we can find some middle ground here. And that was the Beckman. Yeah, fun stuff.
Well, yes, but here's the other thing. Do you know?
That's a fun one.
Do you know that there was actually a plague in Scotland, the bubonic plague, an outbreak of it in 1649, the year of Charles's execution, and actually had been going on for about 5 years. And it was only in Scotland, evidently. So I'm making this whole thing in the script where I wrote about how this debate, right? Because it's written as if it's a debate, a presidential debate, right? Cromwell versus Charles. And it's and it's basically the first question from the moderator is actually so there's this plague up in Scotland. You are the monarch of both Scotland and England. This is before the Act of Union, so it's not Great Britain or the United Kingdom or anything like this, right? But both Scotland and England, as independent nations with independent parliaments, they have the same monarch, right? So they're like, why haven't you done anything about this? And evidently there's this, okay, so I'm extrapolating, right? I'm being very, very creative within saying is this because, he didn't like the Scots because they wouldn't adopt the Common Book of Prayers, right? Or the Book of Common Prayers, right? Which is actually something that there was tension between Charles Stuart and the Presbyterian Scots, predominantly because they didn't want to use the Anglican whatever it's called, High Anglican Common Book of Common Prayers. And this, it's kind of like actually Charles and Cromwell they had some similarities. Like if you would ask them, and I do pretend to ask them in this, do you think the plague in Scotland is a punishment because the Scots are being bad Christians? Both of them would have said yes. They said absolutely. Disease is a divine punishment.
It's so funny because you think after a couple hundred years of the plague, it's just the fucking weather. They're just monsoon rains are coming up, plague's coming, this shit happens. It's predictable, or not predictable, but expected. But it is weird.
Maybe they would clue.
What the fuck?
Or maybe they would clue into the fact after a couple of hundred years of that it's not divine punishment. It's arbitrary, but no. And they were definitely.
It's always really funny too, because it's there'll be some like researcher that's gonna be like, oh, it was actually a couple of cold winters in Scotland which killed all the rats, which led to all the fleas going off onto humans, which led to the
Yeah,
bubonic outbreak. Like, it's probably something like that.
definitely could be something like that. So yeah, actually there's like this really interesting thing where like Charles and Cromwell were somewhat similar, right? Except that Charles Charles basically wanted to make sure, it's the divine right of kings. You're all, whenever you study this part of
Sure.
history, it's always like that Charles's issue was that I am the divine right of kings. I have nobody can question me. You can't try me. Who has the authority to actually put me on trial? So basically, that's his thing. Like nobody gets to put him on trial, right? But then it's also about, did you know that he actually wanted to reform how the aristocracy was getting its honors, like its titles and everything, because it was getting out of control and it was done not on any basis of merit, but just out of favors. So Charles actually wanted to change that so that it was only based on merit. You see,
Huh.
so you have these two people who have like these things that are
Like, you
unexpectedly,
mean,
we would agree with it, right? We'd be like, yes, that's a good idea. And then other
but
things that
when
are
you
just
say
completely
merit, you mean like
outrageous.
for being in his council, right? Like nobility is nobility. Like you don't get to pick and choose that, I guess. But like the
No, but you
people
like
that
get
you would
it
like
becoming an
kind of give power.
earl when you're only like a baron or something, right? Like that's something that's usually
Oh, so like
bestowed
basically
upon you,
raising
right?
people.
Right, right. Or you're just
Gotcha,
a knight
gotcha.
and you somehow get this extra title, or the lands are given to you, right? It was usually done through before that, like via cronyism. Like think of James the First, right?
Yeah, straight
Who
up right.
is
Straight
James
up
the
right.
First's most like best friend, right? It's the Duke of Buckingham, right? Who he was just always
Uh-huh.
giving all this stuff to. That's Charles's dad, right? So he's actually in reaction to that. So
Got it.
so he's trying.
I saw my daddy do this.
That was
Whack.
bad. I don't like it. Exactly, exactly. So then what we have, so that's one thing that where he would be considered like a reformer, right? And
Uh-huh.
then Charles was also married to a Catholic, but he was not Catholic. He was an Anglican,
I
but he
always remember
liked.
him being like kind of Catholic curious
No, his brother. That's James
or
this.
Catholic tolerant, maybe.
Wait, is it no, whose is it? It's Charles, his son's, well, it's later, like the Glorious Revolution, right at the end of the century, so like 50 years later.
Right, right, right.
There's James the Second who
Ah, okay,
is,
I'm getting confused.
how do you say it? Catholic curious, not bi-curious, but Catholic curious.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, but Charles is married to a Catholic. But anyway,
Yes.
so it's one of those things where like just because of his marriage, people are suspicious of him, but he's actually anyway, he's like totally pro high Anglican. So he likes the pomp, he likes the circumstance, he likes the gold, the
How'd you
jewels, the
not? You're
glitter.
the head of the fucking church.
Exactly.
You're
You get
like,
all this stuff, right? And so, of course, people like for the Puritans who are all into let's be austere and deny ourselves everything are looking at that kind of high Anglicanism and saying, yeah, that's basically just Catholicism, or even worse, Orthodox, you know?
yeah, yeah. It's getting there. Huh, interesting. Yeah, the whole English Civil War is a pretty wild period. It feels more like a revolution than a civil war, right? There's
It
just
is
so
really
many.
interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. And then, I mean, I didn't know that Cromwell basically wrote the first constitution, although he called it something interesting. He called it the instrument of government. Yes, but it is considered the first written constitution for England, which I think is interesting. I didn't know that.
Just yeah, I also heard recently that he established the British Navy, which is not nothing.
Not nothing at all.
So let me talk a little bit about how I wrote the play.
It's in two parts, basically in the format of two presidential debates. The first one, when Charles is first imprisoned, but Cromwell still likes him, right? And then the second one,
Mhm,
where at this point the gloves are off and they can't stand each other anymore, right? And
mhm.
basically Cromwell is very Trump-esque, and Charles is very Jimmy Carter-esque, but like both of them, well, you can't be an exaggeration of Trump, but definitely an exaggeration of Jimmy Carter. I know, right?
Yeah, he's beyond satire. He really is.
So let's go on now to the recommended reading list, the sources, other pieces of inspiration. I did use actually some transcripts of existing presidential debates that I thought were good for inspiration. Specifically, I used the NBC News October 2020 debate between Trump and Joe Biden. And that was actually very interesting because if you look at the transcript of that, it was about the COVID response by the government. And therefore, I thought it was really nice to align it with the plague in Scotland in 1648 and 1649 and what could be perceived as in terms of the response of the government to that. For more information on the levelers, you can look at the following sources. The article by Jürgen Diete called The Moderate, Politics and Allegiances of a Revolutionary Newspaper. You can find that on JSTOR. On the Spartacus Educational website, you can find a bio of Elizabeth Lilburne. There is also a wonderful online article written by Lewis Morris about Elizabeth Lilburne and how she rid to her husband's rescue. You can find that on the website Uncomfortable Oxford. Charles Stuart's trial speech and scaffold speech, you completely can find those on Project Gutenberg, as well as Cromwell's letters, which I also used to lift direct phrases from Cromwell into the play. Other good primary sources include Lady Anne Clifford's diaries. You can find her diaries on the website Georgian Papers. And honestly, she was living at the time, so it's a good glimpse into what was happening. In terms of reference books or modern books about the English Civil War, I can recommend Plantagenet Somerset Fry's The Kings and Queens of England and Scotland. It has a good little chapter on Charles I, but it actually goes over all of the kings and queens of England and Scotland. And then finally, a book that I'm reading right now that I think is fantastic is called The English Civil War, A People's History by Diane Purkis. Finally, I want to acknowledge the voice actors, which include Lisa Andrews as Elizabeth Lilburne, John Wright as Charles Stuart, and Mike Wood as Oliver Cromwell. We will upload some outtakes because there were quite a few during this recording, which were fun. And thank you all, and tune in next time for the next episode of Broadcast from the Past.